Welcome to the Jedburgh podcast. I'm the creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Each episode, I speak with transformative leaders, visionaries, drivers of change, and those dedicated to winning no matter the challenge. The Jedburgh podcast is founded in the lineage of the special operations Jedburgh teams of the past and is produced in partnership with Talent War Group, a management consulting and executive search firm focused on helping you optimize the people side of your business. We're sponsored by Jersey Mike Subs. Together, we share the mission of giving, making a difference in someone's life. Visit the Jedburgh Podcast Talent War Group and Jersey Mike Subs on the web and on all social media. A percentage of all proceeds is dedicated to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation.
It's so funny we're sitting here talking about truth and facts when we're talking about the Onion, which is all lies. But
That's the irony.
Yeah, it's very ironic and it's very important. And one of the whole points of the Onion from the very early years was we should at least use this as a way to communicate to people, maybe you should be thinking a little more critically about what you read. Maybe you shouldn't believe everything in print. Because we get this mindset where, oh, it's in black and white, it must be true. Or someone in authority said it on TV, it must be true. And that's just terrifying. That's terrible. What are we doing?
Fake news is everywhere. Depending on who you are and what you care about, you can choose what you want to believe and what you know is just not reality. Fake news has been around for a long time. It's influenced a lot of perspectives. But most producers of fake news will never tell you it's actually fake, except Scott Dikkers. Scott created a brand of journalism built completely on fake news. He told us from the start it was all false and we should never believe it. But even though we knew it was fake, Scott was sure that we would come to love it and enjoy it. For this episode, I traveled to Minneapolis to meet the pioneer of all things false, the founder of the Onion himself, Scott Dikkers. Scott and I covered his book, Outrageous Marketing, where he challenges conventional wisdom on building brand loyalty, making your own rules, and connecting with consumers. Scott's an introvert, but he spent decades leading a team of creatives without an organizational chart, no corporate policies, giving no credit, and getting quality from quantity. Scott and I discussed the evolution of the media industry and the rise of commentary over objectivity. Scott's one of the foremost leaders in satire and comedy. He's the author of over 25 books. He's a director, a producer, an actor. He won a Peabody Award and the Thurber Prize for American Humor. As a journalism student long ago, Scott and the Onion were a topic of daily lectures that I sat in. So naturally, I asked him about the top Onion headlines and his 13 tips to being outrageous. Take a listen on your favorite podcast platforms. Watch the full video version of my conversation with Scott on YouTube. Subscribe to us and follow at Jedburgh Podcast on all social media. Check out our website, jedburghpodcast.com. Learn more about Scott at scottdikkers.com and at It's Scott Dikkers. And get your fill of fake news at theonion.com and at The Onion on social media. Scott, welcome to the Jedburgh Podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us in your house.
Sure. Yeah.
We did yesterday sat down with the Special Olympics,
right,
with the CEO of the 2022 games was transitioning to the CEO of the 2026 games. And I confided in them, as I will to you again, and people will tell me that I shouldn't do this, but it's my first time in Minneapolis.
Oh, that's not a bad thing to admit. Why would that be bad? Why would anyone ever come to Minneapolis? It's way too far north. It's way too cold. And it's kind of like our little secret. It's an adorable place. It's totally adorable, especially in the summer. There's lakes that, people really know how to use the outdoors here because they're basically shut in. Well, I say that because I'm a shut in, but during the winter, they're out in the winter. They're out on their cross-country skis and they're jogging around the lakes. It's a very active city. And there's bike trails are amazing here. It's unlike any other city. You can bike anywhere and never see cars because they've got this whole secret network of bike paths.
Really?
It's fantastic.
Well, there was no cars downtown yesterday.
Well, there's no traffic. There's nobody here. Nobody lives here. It's great.
It reminded me of Denver, circa 2005.
It's very similar to
Everything's
Denver.
New. It's clean.
It's clean. It's
there's
new.
Nobody.
Yep. There's not a lot of diversity.
Mm-hmm.
There's some, but not a lot. Similar to Denver.
Yeah.
So yeah, very similar cities.
And we did notice that we kept seeing these signs for the Sky Bridge all through the city.
In Minneapolis, yeah.
In Minneapolis, in downtown. And we realized last night that that's actually, I think, designed for the winter so that you don't have to go outside,
Correct.
Which means it's that freaking cold here.
Yep. And you go downtown, you just walk on these little sky bridges to cross the street instead of being outside. Yeah. No, it's positively Arctic here. It's really, really rough in the winter. And I had forgotten that. I grew up here, but when you grow up, you don't know you're living in a weird, different place. Yeah. This is just your reality. So wasn't here for I don't know, 30, 40 years. Then I come back, and I'm like, holy shit, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, you can swear.
It's fucking cold here. Like, I had no idea it was so cold. So I'd lived in Chicago for a long time. I thought that was cold. I didn't know what the hell I was talking about. So yeah, it gets cold, and it lasts a long time.
I'm glad we're here in the end of the summer. So
great time to be here.
This is the place.
Hope you brought your bike.
No, I brought all my podcast equipment. I'm dragging that around. That's my exercise.
Well, that's fun too.
Well, Scott, it is an honor to sit here with you today. As I told you before when we were setting up, I studied broadcast journalism when I was in undergrad. Everyone who listens to the podcast knows that because it makes me feel good to talk about it. But also this podcast has been a way over the last year and a half to circle back on that. And I joke that I just finished paying Boston University 20 years later. So it's time to get a ROI on that money that I paid them to get that degree in broadcast journalism. But the time period that I went to school, 1999 to 2003, was at a particular interesting growth period for the Onion, and it was all over the place. And being a student of broadcast journalism, you would go into class and they would tell you about, oh, here's NBC News and CBS and, the rise of Fox, and all these people would come in and it was all real news. And then they would take the Onion and they would compare it and say, and this is fake news, but this is writing. And when you talk about writing and writing styles and telling a story, it was such a textbook that could be used every day to talk about developing narratives and telling stories. And so we always contrasted it with everything. And when we met now back in May at Podfest, and somebody, they came up to me and they said, hey, I can introduce you to Scott Dikkers. I said, oh my God, you're joking, right? And he's like, no, he's just in that room. And you were so gracious to spend a couple of minutes with me and to.
Well, I didn't know I was a virtual professor for you.
Yeah, pretty much
in college. That's great.
But you are founding member, owner, longtime editor-in-chief of The Onion. We're going to talk about that. Author of over 25 books, actor, director, producer, TV, film, winner of a Peabody Award.
Too much stuff. Way too much stuff.
I could go on.
Yeah.
Right? But there's so many ways that we could start this conversation. I was joking with you a few minutes ago that the book I read, Outrageous Marketing, and it tells the story of The Onion. It tells the story of you, and it tells about how to build a brand in a lot of different ways, right? You frame it in terms of without spending money on marketing, but I'd also say, with knowing where you want to go, but having to define the process while you're in it. We talk about these 9 characteristics of performance all the time on the podcast, and Special Operations uses those to recruit, assess, and select talent, and they're so critical because they can be applied to absolutely anything, and I try in many ways to do that. When I read your story and the story of The Onion and your personal story, it brings up drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, curiosity, team ability, effective intelligence, emotional strength, all of these things you had to show and demonstrate, and you tell that story through the book. But we got to start somewhere.
Yes.
And I think we got to start by defining, what do you mean by outrageous? Because that got me, and I was like, what is that?
Yeah, so I use that word because it didn't seem like it was a normal way to run a business. It seemed like what we were doing at The Onion was outrageous. It was just over the top because, you hear stories about starting a business, and maybe it's you get some seed money and you hire some good people, and you try to make a good return on your investment or whatever. But The Onion was not any of those things. The Onion was just a labor of love that snowballed, and it attracted a lot of like-minded people, other sort of misfits who had something to say, who came together and had this incredible obsession to do comedy. And The Onion was just a format for the comedy. It was kind of an accident of history that it was fake news, that it was in the format of a newspaper. It could have been anything. We could have been doing a TV show. We could have been doing a play, anything. It was people who wanted to do comedy and had something to say. And so I knew that on some level, and I had learned a little bit about management and leadership. I studied W. Edwards Deming, mm-hmm. and I edited a series of tapes when I was working at public radio on him, a conference that he did. Peter Drucker was there. And I was just in my early 20s. I didn't really think anything of it. But because I was editing these tapes, and W. Edwards Demings talks like, and then we took the team. And so he, like an hour speech lasts 4 hours. And so my job was to cut out the space between the words. So like you listen to it a lot, and it really like drills it into your head.
You're listening to it 7 times trying to do
Yes. And you get really good at editing 1/4-inch audio tape. And so I kind of had that in my head, like this idea of, you know, constant improvement. The customer is always the boss. You know, total quality management, superior product, superior customer service. Like I had all these things in my head, but I didn't really have anything to do with them because I didn't have a company. I drew a comic strip and I did voice work for radio commercials. But when I got involved with the Onion, I found myself being the leader of a team, and I found myself being the owner of a company. And so I think just naturally I was implementing some of these strategies, but they really happened nicely for me because my own obsession with comedy and my team's obsession with doing comedy fed right into that. We were obsessed with doing the best comedy we possibly could. So that was our way of you know, pursuing like total quality and thinking of the customer as the boss. Like we're going to just give the customer who, we kind of had 2 customers. We had the readers and we had the advertisers who kind of paid our bills. And we were super nice to our advertisers because they paid our bills. And that was a joke. We would do that in the paper. We would pretend like we were sellouts, and we would do anything for the advertisers and to hell with you readers. And the readers loved that attitude. It was funny. But it allowed us to actually serve both customers. But to the readers, we were just giving and giving and giving. Like every week we'd have more comedy. It was always free, like put it free on the street. And so over time, people are just falling in love with this because it's like, how can you not like it? It's free comedy. And you're just getting it every week. It's very consistent. It's very reliable. And through that, I started thinking there are some principles at play here. It did seem different. It did seem over the top, and it did seem outrageous. Because what other companies are doing this? Are soap companies doing this? But then for the book, I did some research and I looked at some other really successful companies, and I saw, the really successful companies all do this. There's always some person at the top, the person who started it or the visionary who propels it forward, who is obsessed with this. Colonel Sanders, obsessed with fried chicken. Yep. You know, that's what makes KFC. We don't have KFC if we don't have a guy obsessed with serving delicious chicken. That was his life's mission. And he would do anything, you know? And and Disney is another one. Steve Jobs is another one. These are people who would do the outrageous thing, the thing that everyone else would tell him you're crazy.
Yeah, relentlessly. I mean, never.
Just
never
unstoppably. Yeah. They can't be stopped because it's an obsession. And they're going to do it anyway. And that's kind of what comedy is for me and for the people who worked at The Onion. We would be doing it anyway.
Well, let me ask you about comedy, because comedy is an important part of society. And you've focused on satire. And you've spoken a lot about the importance of satire in culture and society. Why is comedy so important? And what are people looking for when they come to something like The Onion, or they turn on Comedy Central, or they go to a comedy show?
I don't think they know consciously what they're looking for. They know they want to laugh, but I've thought about this stuff. I'm a nerd about it. So I'll spout some theories about it. I think that humor is the highest functioning thing our brains can do. I think it's the thing that animals can't do. Animals can do almost anything else. They can use tools on a fundamental level. They can communicate on a pretty sophisticated level, some of them. And some people will say chimps can laugh. Some people say dogs can laugh. And sometimes chimps, would do that huffing sound or whatever, and it's really just a display of submission. And that's actually what laughter is. It's a display of submission to someone who thought of something more clever. And so you do this, just like a chimp would do the same thing. So we crave that acknowledgement that someone else thought of something smart. That's a connection point between people. So it's a connecting thing, a human thing. But it's also a way for our brains to activate on the highest possible level, to find something humorous. it's just a frontal cortex thing that is uniquely human. So, for example, when you're depressed, you're probably in lower brain, you're like in chimp brain, you're in reptilian brain, you're in fear mode or whatever. When you can finally laugh at that thing, that gets you out of the fear brain. It gets you out of the stress response, and it's such a healing thing, and comedy is such a great coping mechanism for life. So I don't think people necessarily realize that or know that, but they're obviously turning to it like they would a drink, or a drug at the end of the day. And so it's an incredibly crucial part of human society. And having said that, does it make any difference? Does it change society? That I don't know. It seems like we've had zero effect.
Right.
But I know on an individual level, it helps people. It helps people feel better and make them feel more human.
Mm-hmm. Can you explain this concept of verisimilitude?
Yeah,
because it comes up a lot in the book.
Yeah.
I actually had to look it up.
Verisimilitude is a watchword that we used to use at the Onion a lot. So it comes from, there are 11 different funny filters, I call them. And in my book, How to Write Funny, I lay out how to do comedy in a very straight, no nonsense way. There are 11 different ways to make a joke.
I have to read that because I'm not funny.
You'll be funny after you read that book.
Okay.
So there are
Next.
11 different tools that comedy writers use to make things funny. And there are 11 different kinds of jokes. That's the only kinds of jokes there are. You can mix and match and create different, probably an infinite number of combinations of those 11 things. But one of those 11 things is parody. So when you ape something else, you mimic something else that people recognize, that's funny to them. These are 11 things that are just inherently funny when you do them. Irony is another one. Misplaced focus is another one. When you purposefully focus on the wrong thing. That works with kids. Like peekaboo is a great example. Kids will laugh because it's like, oh, I thought you were there, but you're here. I'm shocked by it. It's just, they're delighted by it. And we experience the same thing on just a slightly more intelligent level. But verisimilitude comes into play with parody. When you parody something else, the more it appears to be like the thing you're parodying, the funnier the parody is going to be. Mm-hmm. So on SNL, when they parody a movie or a TV show, and they get one of their cast members who kind of looks like the person in the movie or TV show, they put a costume on them, they make the set. Sometimes you watch that and you'll hear the audience laugh when the lights go up. Not a single line of dialogue has been spoken, but they see the thing that they recognize. Oh, this is going to be a parody of my favorite show.
That's like Trump.
Or Trump, exactly.
They rode that
see somebody in a wig and in the White House, and people are laughing already. So we learned at the Onion, and we learned this lesson from the National Lampoon, which really raised the bar for parody, because they made things look very close to what they were supposed to be. So Mike O'Donoghue's Vietnamese baby book bit in the National Lampoon looked exactly like one of those baby books. Had the art exactly the same way, the right fonts. It looked real, like someone had filled in the things. And so before them, people weren't really interested in verisimilitude. It would be close enough. We'll make it kind of like the thing. They made it just like the thing they were parodying. So the Onion looks just like a real newspaper, and the fonts are the same. The pictures look kind of straight a lot of the time, and even the way it's written, the AP style is very straight. So that's all verisimilitude. And if you go to the Onion website, it looks like a news website. And so in my opinion, that just makes the comedy funnier because you're doing parody really well. So before you've told joke one, you already have people laughing. So it's like gives you a head start in the comedy.
Yeah, you can't tell when you look at the Onion.
Nope. And if you read it and you still can't tell, that's on you. You're just dumb. But once you read it, you should be laughing at how ridiculous it is.
Yeah, I'm going to throw out some headlines later that have come over the years.
Once you read the content of that format, yeah, that's on you if you're still fooled.
You have focused in your discussion in the book, you laid out these 13 principles of outrageous marketing. We're going to do a quick hit session at the end where I'll throw them out and you give me kind of the top line on each one. But there's kind of these 5 themes, I'll call them, that you had in the book. And I want to go through them because these 5 themes tie very well into our conversations about leadership, building organizations, about vision, mission, about these components, these characteristics that you have, these components of a performance mindset, the 5 soft truths. I'm throwing out all these terms and people who listen will know, yeah, they've come up in different conversations. But I'm going to go through a bunch of them here because I think it's really important to tell your story and also talk about leadership. And in an industry that, if you look at, I mean, as you know firsthand, it's certainly much better than me, but over the last 20 years looks way different than it did. I mean, when you started the Onion, you were still putting typeset on newsprint and having to send, blocks to the printer. And now there is no print.
We're using sticky wax to adhere the stories to paste up boards. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's madness. And there were 3 networks and PBS. Yep. And the USA Today was like the scariest thing in journalism. That's what was going on when the Onion started.
Well, let's start with the first one. The first one is, you've phrased capitalizing on a leader's intense and emotional drive to connect with customers. We talk about drive. Drives, I always put it as number 1 in our list of 9 characteristics. I have a quote from you. It's a little long, but I think it's important to frame a little bit of this. And it's, quote, no matter whether I'm at the Onion or doing my comic strip or making a podcast or writing a book, this inner drive is always pushing me, always compelling me, and always making me strive until the breaking point to get my message out. The inner drive gives me an intense level of commitment to quality. It forces me to find every avenue of exposure possible and exploit it. It educates me and turns me into a master creator. It makes me a compelling leader who attracts like-minded people to join my effort. Over time, it guides me to define and build a brand. All these things together make me an unstoppable force destined to succeed. You grew up here in Minneapolis. By many standards, you classified yourself as poor growing up. You failed out of high school, worked at McDonald's, but you had a true calling, get this message out. Why was growing up in this environment, having that vision, having that mission, so important for you as you've gone through this career?
Yeah, first of all, I'm surprised I wrote that. I'm like so full of myself there, but I
liked it. I thought it was great.
I have always been obsessed with doing comedy, and everyone who does comedy usually has some obsession with doing it for whatever reason. Oftentimes they had to be the peacemaker in their family, so they learned how to be funny to sort of smooth relationships. Or they had some really dark things happening in their family, and they had to be the comic relief or the person to lighten things up. And so from a young age, a lot of comedians and comedy writers learned the skill of comedy as a necessity for getting by. And I'm the same as those people, but my story, everybody's story is different. My story was that I was a super shy, introverted kid, and I didn't really know how to relate to people. I didn't really feel comfortable talking to people or doing things with people. And so from a very early age, back to like 4 years old, I remember my dad brought home scrap paper from his office, and I stapled it together and made a little book and drew a little comedy book and would show that to my grandma, and she would be delighted by it. And I would just get all this love and praise, and figured out from a really early age, oh, I see. If I write funny things down on paper and hand them to other people, that's how I get love and attention. And that's how I can interact with a community, how I can actually be a part of the human society and not just be locked in my room performing in front of the mirror all the time, which is what I kind of always did. And so my compulsion to do comedy came from, it's literally the only way I knew how to relate to other people was through comedy. So it was a survival tactic. It was a way to find my place, find my identity. Obviously, then I go to school and I become a class clown. So that's my niche. I've found my niche and that's my thing. And so the same way that another person would be driven, for example, to go out, to go to parties, to go to sporting events, anybody who can relate to that drive or that need can understand what I was doing because it's the exact same drive. That was how I connected with other people.
The second one that you have here is really interesting to me because it is by definition contrary to Special Operations Forces truth number 2. Okay, and so there's 5 Special Operations Forces truths. Number 2 says quality over quantity. And what we mean by that in special operations is that we can take a team of 12, 6, 2, and if they're highly trained, highly proficient at what they do, that's going to be more effective than throwing bodies at the problem. And if we have better equipment and we know how to use it at a higher level and we train harder, we're going to spend less money. We're going to be in a higher position to be successful than our adversaries who take hundreds of thousands of people, train them for a week, and throw them out on the battlefield. You say that you've been adamant about needing quantity to produce quality. In fact, you have that as one of two critical factors, and there's a second one here, but we're going to get to it in a second. Why does quantity produce quality in comedy?
Yeah, and I definitely think it's different. Like, I would never recommend applying my standard to special ops. I think it works great for comedy, because comedy is not brain surgery. It's not a military operation. It's an entertainment form. So in order for it to work, people have to laugh. People have to like it. And you can't know what people are going to laugh at necessarily. You can have some idea. You can be really experienced at it and probably have a higher batting average than someone else. But at the end of the day, even the best comedians in the world have to go test their new stand-up material and see if it works. And if the audience likes it, they keep working with it, try to improve it. If they don't like it, they scrap it. And the only way to get at the really good material is to try more material. So in comedy, quantity really is the path to quality. Because at The Onion, we learned that if we come up with 10 headline ideas and pick the best one, it's going to be okay. But if we write 100 headline ideas, pick the best one, it's going to be even better. So it's really just a matter of creating more raw material, like digging through more coal, digging through more of the mine to get the gem, And the bigger the mine, the bigger the mass of raw material, and some of it's just terrible, like crappy jokes that you have to wade through.
What's the standard? How do you identify the standard? Like, do you know when you look at it, or is there like a define, this is what it looks like?
It's tricky. I feel like I know it when I see it, but I'm not infallible. There's a process that we developed at The Onion where we'd have this meeting where we'd read all the jokes and
out
loud. And ideally, the person with the most boring voice would read it in the flattest possible tone, because you don't want to unnecessarily or artificially gin it up or sell it. This is what I don't understand about a lot of comedy in the industry. People pitch ideas. That's a terrible idea. You can't go pitching something, because then you're artificially inflating it, making it seem better. When you deliver The Onion to a reader, it's just flat words on the screen or on the page. There's nobody there pitching it. So it better succeed when someone's just reading it like this in a meeting. It better be funny. So you get a certain quorum of people to listen to these terrible ideas one after another, thousands of ideas. Every once in a while, an idea will be read aloud, and one or two people will say, that one was okay. That one was pretty good. And that's about as much of a reaction that you get. You don't get big laughs because the tone is so just dead. It's just like depressing, some of these writers' room meetings where you're going through material. Then after that meeting, in the meeting where you kind of look at the short list, they actually look pretty good, because a joke that can survive that kind of horrible, dark environment, it's got to be a pretty strong joke, for somebody to say, okay, that one wasn't bad. They're actually pretty good.
Plus, you don't know people's mood when they're reading it, right?
And that's the thing about comedy is the best way to ensure a good comedic performance is to control the context of the audience as much as possible. So The Onion does that with the format by making it look like a newspaper, making it all serious. Because when everything's serious, that's when you're not supposed to laugh. That's when you want to laugh.
Right.
So that helps. On a TV show, they bring out a warm-up comic and they gin everybody up. And, hey, everybody, let's laugh. It's going to be really fun. And they got signs and everything. They do everything they can to control the context. It's so hard in written comedy because somebody could be sitting at breakfast. They could be on the subway. They could be falling asleep. You have no idea what they're doing. So the joke has to be such a powerful joke. And when I say joke, I mean like the headline. That's what we call jokes. And it has to be so powerful that it can reach someone even if they're in a really bad state and still seem funny.
There was a second factor here that you've rolled up a bit into this same conversation where you talked about judging on material on merit, leaving ego aside, because that's how the best work rises to the top. I believe in organizations, when we build organizations and we build teams, that's something we talk about a lot, and we'll say that, and it briefs well. And then you get in the room and it's like, okay, well, now we're going to do a performance review on this person. And you're like, well, I'm from Boston. They're from Boston. We talk about the Red Sox. They're pretty good at their job. And it's like, oh, yeah, but, they missed revenue projections, quarter on quarter, and they have, 40% attrition. But he's a good dude. How do you separate it?
It's one of the hardest things to do in an organization, to actually look at the meritocracy of it. And look at the quality of the product, look at the quality of the work, and not look at the personalities. Because we're human beings. Our brains are hardwired to care about interpersonal dynamics. Who do we like? Who do we not like? Who do we want to work with? Who do we not want to work with? And when I was putting together the Onion staff and the kind of the system that we use to put together the content, I wanted to avoid that as much as possible. Part of it is I'm an introvert. I don't trust the sort of group think. I only trust this, I don't know, some sort of like weird mathematical science for coming up with the best joke. But I think you have to, on some level, circumvent your chimp brain when you're in a group, because chimp instincts are not helping us in any environment. Pretty soon we're just going to be throwing feces at each other. So the way we would do that at the Onion was, so in most comedy rooms, the head writer would come out and pitch ideas, and everybody would say, they're great, boss, and those are the ideas that you'd run with. And they're not going to be the best ideas. Mm-hmm. At the Onion, if the janitor came up with a good idea, it would go on the front page. Like, I don't care who came up with it. It's all about the merit. So the way we would do it is all the jokes would go on a list without any names on it. And so when you're reading those jokes in that long, boring meeting, nobody knows who wrote the jokes. And so you're judging them purely on merit. And the head writer has the same vote as the lowly peon in the group. And basically, if a joke gets, half or more votes of okay, then it goes on the short list. Then the team of editors can look at it and assess like which ones work, and they talk about them as a group. That's the way that we came up with to eliminate the human element and the ego element. And once you do that enough, people get the culture. The culture is, we want the best joke. Mm-hmm. And people will sacrifice their own joke, and they'll say, that joke's better than mine, So, and also people aren't allowed to pitch their own jokes. They're not allowed to advocate for their own jokes. They can only advocate for another joke that they like. That mimics the audience's experience. Audience doesn't know us. They don't know who's more likable. They only know the joke on the page. So it's very important that all that ego be eliminated.
Well, and you took away even putting writers' names on the articles.
Even in the final printed publication, the names are gone. That's a slightly different strategy, but it kind of furthers that culture. It furthers the goal of the team that, hey, it's all about making this final product be really funny. It's not about me getting any credit for what's happening. But yeah, the deeper goal there was, I had seen other humor publications fail because they made celebrities out of the writers. And then when those writers left, readers turned on the publication. Like, it's not funny anymore because Doug Kinney left or whatever. Kurt Anderson left. It's not funny anymore. So at The Onion, I wanted it to be so strong as a brand that we could, and we did at one point, lose 80% of our writing staff in one fell swoop. Readers had no idea.
Yeah. I think that comes down to standards. So much of that when we talk about building resilient organizations. I work with athletes at the collegiate level now, and we talk about building a team that's built on a defined standard. Exactly. And it doesn't matter who the captain is. It doesn't matter who the athletes are that come through there. It's you have a core set of cultures that exist.
It's a culture and it's a system. Mm-hmm. Yeah, agreed.
In special forces, people will tell me, oh, you were in the Army, you were in SF, you just, it's a hierarchy. You wait to get told what to do. And I tell them all the time, actually, one of the flattest organizations that I ever worked in was on my special forces team, because I come in as a captain, as the detachment commander, but it's my first day on the team. My team sergeant, so the senior enlisted guy on the team, had been in our special forces unit for 20 years. And what you learn very quickly when you come in and then you meet everybody else, and they're on deployment 8 and 10, and they've been on the team for 4 years, 5 years, 10 years. They've been all over the world. They know so much. And so you quickly, even though you're in charge and you're the commander, right, and the buck stops there, you're ultimately responsible. If you don't start looking around the room and saying, all right, here's what we're tasked to do, what's everyone's opinion, and start taking the best ideas, regardless of where people sit. And you even get new guys in, though. And that's what was really cool about serving in special operations is you get guys who they're like refrigerator mechanics or electricians before they come in. And then all of a sudden, you're trying to solve a problem and the guy's like, oh yeah, I was a plumber before I came in. You're like, great, you're toilet man now. Like, get over there and fix the toilets because there's no one else here to do it.
And sometimes the best idea is going to come from the 20-year veteran, and sometimes the best idea is going to come from the total newbie because they don't know what can't be done, and they can change the whole thing and wake everybody up to a new idea.
Yep.
So you got to be open to all of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, we found that all the time. Can you talk about the difference between the attention economy and the love economy? Because I think that exists right now.
Yeah, totally. So I grew up in the information economy. It was all about that being the commodity. And then it transitioned to the attention economy with the rise of the internet and especially social media, who can get the attention. And I was looking at that realizing, yeah, you can get somebody's attention because you can do all these crass, kind of sleazy, clickbaity things to grab attention. But what kind of staying power does that have? Very little. It's going to maybe get your attention for a few seconds. I realized, no, we live in a love economy. We live in an economy where customers or the end user of any media wants to be with things that they love. They want to be with voices they love to listen to, comedy they love, movies they love, ideas they love. They want to buy products they love. That's what's going to ultimately be so much more powerful. And I think a lot of companies miss that, and they don't realize what simple little things they can do to make people love them. For example, we have terrible customer service as a rule in this world now. Everybody farms it out overseas to people who don't care and, who oftentimes don't speak the language very well. And that says a lot about what that company thinks of their customer. It tells them they don't care. And the customer's no idiot. They can feel that, So my goal at The Onion was always to make the reader and the advertiser, our two customers basically, who got two totally different products, to make them feel absolutely unconditionally loved. Like they knew they were going to get our best, and building that kind of goodwill was something I learned from Walt Disney because he created what he thought were the best, most family-friendly films, TV shows, books, everything he could for decades, and just losing money, constantly losing money, begging banks for more loans, begging his brother to go get more money so they could just survive a little bit longer to create one more product. And when you create that kind of goodwill and you raise like 2 generations of customers who now associate your name with quality family entertainment, you can't lose. Yeah. You can't lose. And so for me at The Onion, it was never about the money. It was always about producing the highest possible quality product and just being relentless in giving that to people, because I knew that ultimately that would pay off. And it may be a long time, and I sometimes wonder if The Onion sold too soon, before it was really at that Disney point.
Yeah.
Because Disney went from being completely broke to being the number one Fortune 500 company in the space of like 10 or 20 years.
Right.
So like really a quick turnover.
Yeah.
Because once people realize, oh, that's what they are, and we all love them, then they're non-negotiable. It's like, we got to have Disney.
Yeah, well, I mean, and now it's ingrained in culture of being a child and an adult.
Yep.
I mean, my son's 2, he's been to Disney. We went when we were at Podfest. That was actually so funny. Don't think I told you this. This is actually how I got to go to Podfest. I got to go to Podfest because I told my wife, hey, I've been invited to speak at Podfest. It's in Orlando. So if we go, it's on Memorial Day weekend, but you can take the kids to Disney and we'll bring your your brother and your parents. It'll be a big family trip. You guys go to Disney, I'll go to Podfest. And somehow it worked out beautifully because they all went to Disney for 3 days. I went to the conference.
Yeah, it's funny you said it because another person at Podfest told me that same story, that he convinced his family to come with him to Podfest just to go to Disney World.
Yeah. Otherwise, there was no way she was going to let me go. Not on like the Memorial Day weekend. It was never going to happen.
Yeah.
You brought up the business side. You started bringing up the business side a bit of the Onion. And the next two themes, actually, I have titled here are the business side of it and business side of journalism and the Onion. And that third theme that you bring up is defining and then refining a brand's personality. As we mentioned, you edited, owned, worked for, ran, been a part of the Onion for 30 years. And you've seen the good time, you've seen the bad. You've watched as different people have come in and tried to take it different directions. As I was reading about this and learning more about it, I really thought of you as like the keel to a sailboat. And every time some wind comes from a different direction and tries to push that sailboat over, the keel rights it back. And I feel like you've seen that over your career where you've left, they called you back, you got it back on track, you left, and that's happened a number of times.
I never thought of that. That's a pretty good analogy.
It's like a grounding force.
Yeah, they would often bring me back just to get it back on track, when they thought that it was veering off track or something. Yeah.
Why and let me read you something because you alluded to it here. I think it's important because it's about the brand building. And you said the brand we were building at the Onion was one of a faceless news organization, an established, powerful beacon of truth that handed the news down from on high and openly dismissed its readers as dopes, dummies, and layabouts. You are dumb was the Onion's official slogan for a long time. To live out the most heightened manifestation of that brand, to be the most outrageous versions of ourselves that we could, we hid staff names and made it a truly faceless organization. We talked a bit about that. But you said the more impersonal and cold the voice of the Onion, the more it would live up to that vision. It was about this brand. Why does the brand permeate more over time than anything else in the organization? And I'll quantify that in terms of as the industry changed.
Yeah, so to understand brand, I feel like it's important to understand the concept of character because every brand has a character. And I wrote a whole book about character. Character is one of those 11 funny filters I mentioned. And character works really well when you can define what your character archetype is because there are certain comedy character archetypes that always come back in entertainment. Certain characters that audiences love to see over and over and over. And they come back in different forms, so they always seem new. One of my favorites is the bumbling authority figure. This is a classic character from the Commedia dell'arte, Renaissance theater, and audiences absolutely love it. It's like the Keystone Cops, the bumbling politician, Leslie Nielsen from the Spy Hard movies or Police Squad, Ron Burgundy, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective. He's a great reporter. So these are people in authority who are important. They usually have some sort of insignia or badge that indicates that they have authority, and they're usually a pretty low-level authority. Paul Bart Mall Cop is a perfect example. But they're bumbling. They're bumbling fools, and the audience loves to laugh at those people. So there are several others, about 40 other character archetypes that always come back, that are very popular. I list them all in this book. And when you're creating a brand, you need to know who your character is. And at The Onion, I realized we are the bumbling authority. We are a big, important newspaper acting like we know all the truth of the world and what's happening, and you should only listen to us, ignore everything else you hear. But we spout foolishness. So it's to a T what that character is. And so another thing that I mean by the word outrageous is when you become a heightened version of your character, like once you've established who your character is, and the audience or your fans, your customers, whoever, the public at large, recognize who your character is, you need to lean into that. And you need to play that to the hilt. So if the Onion's a bumbling authority figure, we need to be more self-important. We need to be more like a big media company that doesn't care about you, lives in an ivory tower. And we need to spout more foolishness. So the content has to get funnier, and the format has to get more impenetrable and like there's less of a connection between us and the reader, because that makes it funnier. So that's counterintuitive from sort of Web 2.0, which is where you're supposed to communicate with your customers online. You're supposed to take their feedback. We would insult readers, and we would never respond to comments on social media.
Now they're like, you respond to every comment.
Well, now I do, because I have a different brand that I'm doing. But with the Onion, the whole thing was, you don't want to respond because that's not the character. So you play into that character and you use that character. That's a smarter strategy than just kind of going by the book and saying, well, the book says we're supposed to be friendly to our customers and we're supposed to give them what they want. Yes, but what's your character? What would your character do? What's going to make them like you more as a character, as a brand? And how should you behave to further that? If it's the opposite, then you do the opposite. Then you do the totally counterintuitive thing, and you insult them and you demean them, and you pretend like you're not giving them. Clearly, you're giving them a lot. You're giving them free comedy constantly through social media, through the website. You put out a book and a podcast, and you've got all this content out there that people get for free. It becomes funny and fun for them, that they know it's a joke. And that's another layer of humor that you're giving them. You're giving them irony, because yes, you're being so giving to them, but you're pretending like you hate them. It's funny.
I think it's funny. The evolution of media over the last 20 years has been something that I would say, when we look at industries, it's been one that's undergone probably one of the most rapid changes on a number of fronts. We've
Absolutely.
gone from print to digital. Nobody reads. There's no newspapers anymore. It's all online.
Yep.
The 24-hour news cycle. Social media has now created an environment where anybody's a reporter. Anybody can, in 2 seconds, create something, put it out into the world, and somebody can look at it and say, oh yeah, that's truth. And oftentimes that gets more views and more comments and more attention than the actual truth might. There's been this rise also of this, what I've called shock jock journalism. If I remember when I was at BU and they wouldn't take Howard Stern his money to put his name on the building to get, and the building at BU that Com is in is still the same piece of shit building that it was 30 years ago.
Because they wouldn't take his money.
They wouldn't take his money. And now he's a legend.
That's
in
a
journalism.
terrible decision.
Everybody said it was a terrible decision then, and it remains a terrible decision. But he was the first one who he really started changing the industry. And then you had guys like Bill O'Reilly, and I've told this story before. Bill O'Reilly came, and he's a graduate at BU of the graduate program, and he would stand up, and he gave a great speech one day, and he said, "Listen, I'm not a reporter. I'm a political commentator. So you have to understand, when I stand up in front of you, I'm giving you my opinion on this issue. I'm not telling you the news. We're putting it in the context of a situation that's occurring right now, but I'm a commentator." Now I think we live in this world where everybody's up on TV. There is no separation. There's
Lines
no
are all
delineation.
blurred.
Yeah.
We got rid of the fairness doctrine in the
gone.
80s. It's totally gone, and so we can do anything we want on the media. There doesn't have to be balance, and that has been a big change. And so when I mentioned earlier, when the Onion started, USA Today was the biggest threat to journalism. And so then the fairness doctrine gets repealed, and we have things like Fox News, and then Alex Jones, and the social media, rabbit holes that people can go down. So in the mid 2000s, I realized that was kind of the new bugaboo of journalism that the Onion would be remiss if it didn't start parodying. So we started doing the Onion News Network, which were these web videos that were more of a parody of Fox News, more of it was like news that was guaranteed to scare you, and it was like oppressive, frightening, in-your-face news, and those were fun. The Onion the Onion News Network was super fun. Yeah, because when the Onion started, as I mentioned, USA Today was the biggest threat to journalism. And then as the years went on in the 90s, we started seeing more of these shock jocks and more of these like sensational political commentators, reporters, what have you. And by the mid-2000s, I had just come back from the Onion after a hiatus and realized that the real threat to journalism at that time was that sort of Fox News model. And so we created the Onion News Network to be more of a parody of Fox News than a parody of USA Today, which is essentially what the Onion was. Mm-hmm. And so it was big, powerful, dangerous, in-your-face news that was meant to scare you and just be super intimidating and be super opinionated and just a little angrier, and less of a sort of AP style that was meant to seem like it wasn't editorializing, and more like it was editorializing so much that it was almost offensive.
Yeah. When you think about these networks now and how far we've come from those days, and you mentioned Fox, and it's crazy because you can put Fox on and then you can put on MSNBC, and you see like they're having the same conversation with completely different. It's like you can't even call them facts. It's just these opinions. When you think about these different channels, Fox, MSNBC, CNN, and how far we've come, where are we going with this? Is there an end?
I hope so. I hope there's an end to it, but we can't escape who we are. We're human beings and we're biased. And I've reached the point of almost being totally jaded, so that anything I watch especially on TV, like in the mainstream media, I just don't believe any of it. Yeah. Because MSNBC, their advertisers are drug companies and oil companies. And so are they ever going to say anything about climate change? Are they ever going to say anything about the disastrous healthcare situation in our country? No, they're never going to say anything about it. Fox News is just a propaganda arm for the Republican Party. Can't believe anything they say. So, I think what the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine has really done is basically unleash the worst of humanity, so that people are just out there being totally self-interested or interested because they're getting paid to be interested. And that's all we hear. You always have to follow the money with these people. So many people like Ben Shapiro, or Dennis Prager is one of my favorites because he's funded by the Koch brothers. And the whole goal of organizations like that is to indoctrinate young people. What's his name? Charlie Kirk is another one with his organization, Turning Point USA. Mm-hmm. Big right-wing, just wacko funders who are trying to indoctrinate young people to be Republicans. And that's the whole point of it. So they find these people who have these just incredibly unpopular opinions to go out there and spout them. And you can't really trust anything they say, and right-wing radio is the same thing. There's nobody on the left on radio. It's gone. There's no progressives. There's no establishment Democrats or anything. Everybody on the radio is extreme right-wing because that's who's paying for the ads. It's people who want to perpetuate the most fierce form of capitalism, and so that's all we get to hear. So it is a little disconcerting, and I don't know where it ends. I do like this movement in Gen Z that you're seeing online, where younger people are learning how to do research more. They're learning how to fact check, because the problem is a lot of people now have completely lost any criteria for how to determine whether something is true. And that's just terrifying. If you see some of these interviews with people at Trump rallies, and some of the conspiracies that they're spouting, and they're just so convinced that they're true. And what's their criteria? I saw it on the internet. Yeah. There's no, and when you look back at history, like, is that any different? For centuries, we were all Catholics, and we would burn someone who wasn't a Catholic. So it's not like we haven't always believed in conspiracy theories or things that aren't true, but it just seems like we had made a lot of progress with the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment. And it seemed like the beginning of the 20th century we were on a really good track. And then everything has just gone completely to shit. Yeah. And we've really backslid into ignorance. And it is pretty frightening. It seems to me like a much broader trend than anything that might change in a time of years, but more in a time of generations, which is why I have a lot of hope in Gen Z, because I feel like they have an amazing bullshit detector as a generation. Mm-hmm. And they're really good at getting at the truth of things. That's what we've lost, I think. We've lost, like, the truth.
We did an episode a few weeks back, episode 69, with a co-founder and CEO of a company called Redocracy. His name's Mario Vasilescu. And he talks about what used to be the information commons, and we used to have philosophers, and we had Encyclopedia Britannica, and we had
things we could all agree on that were true.
Right, yeah. You could generally say, and that, all of that's gone. And
all
now,
that's out the window.
He talks about infobesity, right, and how we are in a world now where, just like the food epidemic, where everybody came in and it was like, oh, eat whatever you want, and then people realized, well, you can't just eat whatever you want. Now infobesity is this constant influx of information, and then there's information warfare, and people are using it against you.
It's all propaganda versus propaganda. That's a great term, infobesity. It's like we're all getting our information from the same way we get food from the gas station. We're just getting it the cheapest, worst place we can possibly find it.
And you're consuming it, and there's no way to start to triage what you're actually looking at.
Because it's effective. People hear information and believe it, and they're gone. They're done. Because you can't convince them otherwise. You can't deprogram them. It's just, that's how people are wired,
But social media is also propagating it, because social media. So I use the example of boats. I like boats. Okay. So I go on my Instagram and I look at a video of a boat. And so now what do I get?
You get
more
boats.
videos of boats.
Right.
So now my whole perception of everything in the world is now that, well, everybody loves boats because that's what Instagram's telling me that all exists in the world.
Yeah, no, these wormholes and silos that social media puts us in, at some point I feel like something has to be done about that. I don't know what it is. I don't know if the tech companies tweak things, or if there has to be some kind of government regulation, but something has to happen with that, because it's really dangerous.
Well, it's quite frustrating, because we I feel like produce great content, and we make these awesome video episodes and we put them on YouTube, and we get 5.
Yeah, why isn't anyone finding my podcast when it's clearly the best podcast? Yeah.
But then you'll go and you'll look at some crazy video of someone falling off a chair, and it's got 5 million views.
Yep. What are you going to do about that?
I know what I'm going to do. Keep producing content, and eventually it's going to work out.
That's exactly my philosophy.
Standard.
If you keep putting it out, and you keep honing your brand, and you keep honing your voice, then whoever likes that voice and likes that is going to find you, and that's your tribe, and that's what you can do. And exactly you have to be happy with whatever size that tribe is, and hopefully it grows. And if it's not growing, then it's probably on you to adjust it a little bit and make sure that you're appealing to a good amount of people.
Yeah,
that's the only formula that works now.
Where do we go for objective journalism?
That's a really tricky question. It's always a good policy, I think, and I always check, I'll check the New York Times, then I'll check the Fox News website, and if they're saying the same thing, I can generally, because they'll have a different angle on it, but if it's the same basic facts, I'll believe it, to a certain extent. But, Carl Sagan has this great phrase, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if it's something like a foreign leader was elected and someone else lost, both, of the extremes of the media are saying that this fact, I have no reason to disbelieve that. Doesn't seem like crazy. But if you're going to tell me JFK Jr. is still alive, you need extraordinary evidence for that, because that's an extraordinary claim. So I think that's something a lot of people forget too. They're happy to believe anything. They don't care how outrageous it is. And the slightest bit of non-evidence convinces them. Oh, I saw it on Facebook.
Yeah.
No, you need a lot more evidence than that. So that's kind of how I live. And I also try to live more in an existential gray zone, where if I'm going to rely on some fact or some truth for my own safety, I'm going to research that pretty heavily. But if it's just some trivial knowledge about something going on in the world, it's not that important to me. I don't need to know it. So there are levels for what to care about and what to really know is true.
I was the MC of this panel last night that was hosted by the Global Soft Foundation, and what the keynote speaker was he just retired Vice Admiral Tim Szymanski, and he was the deputy commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, and he was talking about how in today's environment, people are overvaluing what they're putting primacy on is what their buddy or their friend tells them over hard evidence. And what's happening is, and the context it was in about mental health. And so we were talking about mental health, we were talking about post-concussion syndrome, we were talking about soldier suicide, and you have this world now where people are coming in and they're saying, well, these are the facts. Okay, where'd you hear the facts? Well, my team's talking about it every day. Okay, but where's the evidence?
Yeah, what's your data? What's the real evidence? It's so funny we're sitting here talking about truth and facts when we're talking about the Onion, which is all lies. But that's
the irony.
Yeah, it's very ironic, and it's very important. And the whole point, one of the whole points of the Onion, from the very early years, was we should at least use this as a way to communicate to people. Maybe you should be thinking a little more critically about what you read. Maybe you shouldn't believe everything in print, because we get this mindset where, oh, it's in black and white, it must be true, or someone in authority said it on TV, it must be true, and that's just terrifying. That's terrible. Well, what are we doing?
Well, but that's our default position. Our default position when we hear something is, and that's the scary part that I think you were talking about, is that we've come into a world where you can't turn on the 6 o'clock news while you're making dinner and just have it running and be consuming it somewhat passively, saying, oh yeah, that's what's happening in the world, because you genuinely have to pay attention and now ask yourself, well, is that really what happened?
Yeah, and all of this is playing to the worst human instincts, because we're tribal, we're chimps, And so if our tribe believes one thing and we hear something else that someone else believes in a different tribe, we don't care about the evidence at all. All we care about is they're wrong because they're in that tribe and I'm right because I'm in this tribe. And that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, that's when it gets scary.
Yes.
Let's talk about leadership. Your leadership, primarily.
All right.
Curiosity is one of those characteristics of special operations that I talked about. And we define curiosity as exploring the unknown, challenging the status quo in pursuit of better, continuous growth attitude. Can I find solutions to problems, and sometimes problems that people don't even know exist? It's about opportunity. Your fourth principle theme that you talked about was playing by a new set of rules. To me, that's challenging the institutions that are set. Journalism is definitely an institution of its own right. You said, quote, the Onion writers broke a lot of rules. You experimented with topics, people, storylines. You had legal troubles for going at because people felt defamed and insulted. Why is challenging the status quo so important to building a successful brand?
It's a great question, and I think any leader has to realize that whatever systems they have in place, whatever they're doing that they think works, if they ask themselves, is this the best possible way this can be done, and no better way will ever be invented, the answer always has to be no. Like, do you honestly think things will never get better? No, a better idea is going to come along. So by being curious and, for example, like, being open to ideas from the lowliest members of your team. You're just talking about the new person on the team with new ideas. Sometimes the new person can come in and be like, oh, have you tried this? There's going to be a better mousetrap. Somebody's going to invent it. You need to be open to receiving that as soon as it comes so you can be the first to use it. If you're too set in your ways and you're locked into strategies and methods and techniques that you think are the best, you're just lost. Yeah, that's how a company like Xerox lost the personal computer wars to Apple, which was a couple of guys in a garage. Xerox had everything. They had Xerox PARC, where they brought Bill Gates and Steve Jobs and all these other really smart people to envision the future of computing, and they came up with the personal computer. And Steve Jobs asked for all the notes later from Xerox, and the person at Xerox, it was like a receptionist, got the call, asked her boss, was like, are you sure we just want to give all this away? All this great information? The boss said, it's fine. Go ahead, give it to him. Because they figured, well, we're doing it the best way.
Right.
At Xerox, we're doing everything perfectly.
Mm-hmm. I remember the commercials.
There's no better way to improve the way people create or process information. We got it handled. Yeah. That's just death.
Blockbuster.
Yeah, we did a great video at The Onion about Blockbuster being a living museum where you can go and see, because they were still in existence in the mid-2000s.
There was
and people were already watching Netflix videos, and it was almost like you're living in this strange cross-section of eras where you can rent movies from Netflix and watch them, and you can go down the street to Blockbuster and rent a tape in the same day. It's like, oh my God. And that was Blockbuster's field to dominate. That was theirs to lose. And they just gave it away to Netflix. Totally gave it to them.
Well, they had there's the story too, where the Netflix founders went to meet with them, and it was like the Ford versus Ferrari scene, where,
exactly.
Where they went, and they turned them down.
Yeah, it happens all the time. The Onion, in its first year, went to visit the alternative weekly newspaper in Madison to try to get some seed capital, which we never got. But we just got laughed out of the office, and now that publication is out of business. We talk about adaptability. Adaptability is one of those 9 characteristics. I mean, you have to demonstrate it. Yeah, and being on the cutting edge and being aware of what's new and adopting that, I think that's what adaptability is. That's how else are you going to adapt in a business landscape anyway.
How do you overcome the fear of that, though? Because I think you'll talk to a lot of leaders, especially ones who fail, if they'll admit it, if they have humility, another one, and they'll actually admit it. I think what happens is that people get in that position and they get scared. And they say, well, what we're doing has been working. If I take this risk, what if it doesn't work?
I mean, I am a very conservative business person when it comes to business, and I'm mostly not a business person. I'm mostly just a creative person. But I would always try something in an arena that is where I can afford to lose, So if the Onion is plugging along well and we're making money with this newspaper and we have an opportunity to do a radio news show, I'm not just going to put all my eggs in that basket. I'm going to try it and do it on the cheap and see if it works, see if it, gets some traction. And then if it does, then I'll put some resources into it. So I would do the same with any new idea. I would try it. I would test it, and see what happens.
Mm-hmm. In episode 14, we interviewed Selena Kopic. She's a comedian. She wrote a book about being a blonde and the stereotypes around being a blonde. She's also one of my best friends growing up. So, and she's got a great story, and she put an album out a couple of years ago too. But she talked about punching up, never punching down, and the importance of that, not only in comedy, but also as you build brands and as you look at brand identity and as a leader. You talked about it in your book, and I was hoping you might define that for me here and talk about the line. And
sure.
Is there a line?
Yes, there's definitely a line in comedy, and people always do talk about don't punch up. I mean, don't punch down, only punch up. But there is a whole other side to that. So the formula that I've always used, well, I shouldn't say always, because at first I had no idea. Like, I was just trying everything, and I punched down a lot and got a lot of angry letters, and I learned, But eventually I landed on this idea of comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable, which comes from old, progressive journalism from the mid-20th century. And that means, yes, you should punch up. You should make fun of establishment, authority figures, anything that's big and powerful. Bring it down to size. People love that. Audiences love it. But you should also lift up, not just not punch down, but lift up the people who are disenfranchised, people who are poor, the victims. Anytime you can elevate them and de-elevate the powerful, audiences love that in comedy. So how does that translate to businesses and brands? I think audiences for comedy are the same as like a field of potential customers for a brand. Like, in comedy, they kind of have to like you in order for you to be funny, especially if you're a stand-up comedian. And companies, too, need to be liked. There needs to be a general positive feeling you're getting from a company. And if they're making fun of old established traditions, Apple's a great example. They came in making fun of IBM, and that made people like them. They're the underdog, They're punching up, and they're also lifting up, they had a woman come in with a sledgehammer and slam the big Brave New World video. It wasn't a 50s businessman in a gray flannel suit.
Mm-hmm.
So the subtle idea was we're new, we're into new things, we're into feminism. It was like there was a lot of subtext in that people got. And they do the same thing with their Think Different ad campaign. using
Right.
Apple a lot as an example here. Taking somebody like Gandhi and just using him as a symbol like that. That communicates so much subtext about, that's an oppressed people.
Mm-hmm.
That's somebody who lifted up an oppressed people and fought against a big established authority. That's all, totally exactly the attitude and the mindset that Apple wants to have its customers think about them.
Right. The fifth theme that you had here is using these instinctive strategies to build a world-class team that tirelessly works to make products so good that customers can't help but fall in love with them. I bring this up because it talks about the team. Team ability is one of our 9. You're an introvert, as you mentioned. You read books on leadership earlier in your career, and you talked about becoming now, the owner and in charge and the editor at the Onion, and saying, well, now I have a team. What am I going to do? But there was no org chart there. There was no titles. There was no work hours.
Right.
It was very flat. There was the meritocracy that we spoke about, but it was mission focused. But you also said that you wanted to keep people focused on the mission. You didn't want to be their friend, yet you displayed servant leadership, that you love them all, but you had a very high standard and expected them to meet that standard on a daily basis. But also, it wasn't a place for a community.
Yeah.
Yet you went to bat for them time and time again and answered the call every time the company came back to you.
Yeah. So there's that book, I forget who wrote it, The 5 Levels of Leadership, and the level 5 leader is the egoless leader who doesn't care who gets credit, doesn't care what people think of them, is just super effective at leading a group. And then there's the level 4 leader who is the on-hands manager who can delegate and get people to do what they need. So I basically used that because I knew that as an introvert, I was never going to be the general on the field, like barking out orders and leading giant teams. I've had to be in that position a few times, and it's just very unnatural for me. So I'm so much better locked in a room and then having a lieutenant to go out and do that stuff. And it's so much easier to manage 5 lieutenants than it is for me anyway, than to manage, armies of people. And we had a pretty huge army of people when we started the Onion News Network videos, because it took a lot of crew and a lot of people. And even the Onion itself, ultimately, there's hundreds of people on the writing team. There's some core writers, and there's freelancers, and then there's contributors. So it's like this huge expanding pool of people. So when that type of level 5 leader is an introvert and doesn't want to go out and talk to anybody, it's really easy for people to think, oh, he doesn't care, or he's not really invested in us, or whatever. So by showing up when it matters, for people, they then stop caring about your individual style. Like, they don't care that you're an introvert. They don't care that you never come out. Like, I have a reputation at the Onion for the guy who never came to the Christmas party at the Onion. And they would have these big, storied parties where people would talk about him for weeks after and be like, nah, not interested.
Yeah. Sometimes it's better not to know.
Sometimes. But they knew that I would be there when it mattered, when it came to making sure they got good health insurance or whatever. Like, that's when I would go to bat. And I would always be happy to fund the Christmas party, happy to, make sure there's a good band there, whatever. But ultimately, the other thing about what you said in terms of it being about the work and not about a group of friends, that was especially challenging for the Onion, because it started as just almost like a punk band, just people getting together, riffing or whatever.
Yeah.
And it never really felt like a business, especially to the writers. They would show up and have fun, and they would get to do this fun stuff, and they never really saw the business side of it. So when it actually grew into a money-making business that had responsibilities and fiduciary responsibilities and all this stuff, it was really difficult for a lot of them to think of it as a company. Like, wait, what? No, we're just family here. We're just friends, And so for me, making sure that it was always about the work focused people on putting all their comedy energy onto the page. Because when it's a group of friends, you're going to be making each other laugh. And I can't tell you how many times I would emerge from my hole of an office and tell people, more of that on the page. because I didn't like when people are joking around the office not working. I liked when they were working because they were so funny and they would just make each other laugh. I was like, no, put that energy into your next list of ideas that we're going to read at the meeting, So ultimately, I figure like if you want friends, if you want a group, if you want a community, do that outside of work.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's been a lot of funny in the Onion over the years, and I pulled a list here. I don't know if it's the list; it's a list.
It's your list.
It's a list I found.
Yeah. Okay.
Of the top Onion articles, and I'll say a couple of them, but I want to know your opinion too and what you think some of the top are. But we've got stuff like Harry Potter books spark rise in Satanism among children.
Right. So that was a funny story that was one of the ones that really early on was believed to be true by people. So there were a lot of like Christian websites that reposted it and got people really upset and really inflamed and writing letters, thinking that it was really true and being scared for their children at school and stuff like that. So that's one of those examples where people who should know better are just believing what they read.
But if you watch the movies, there could be some sense. I could see how you could interpret that.
I can't. I saw the movies.
Johnson & Johnson introduces nothing but tears shampoo to toughen up newborns. I'm buying that.
Yeah, so it's a good one. I like it. It's one of those pure irony headlines, where. And I don't think Johnson & Johnson got angry and sent us a cease and desist letter for that one because it just seems so obviously not true.
Right.
But we just talked about don't punch down, punch up. And here we are talking about torturing babies. So sometimes there's one rule in comedy, and that is there are no rules. Mm. So sometimes you can punch down and it still works. I think in that instance, it's because babies, especially babies buying Johnson & Johnson baby shampoo, I guess, they're probably first world babies. They're doing fine. George Carlin was good at this, and I actually learned this from him. He was really good at recontextualizing the target of his joke to make it so that they were the comforted. They were the comfortable, and you had to afflict them, as opposed to being the afflicted that you had to comfort. Mm-hmm. So that's a situation where we're recontextualizing babies and allowing people to laugh at torturing them.
Okay, funny toy banned because of 3 stupid dead kids.
That's the exact same formula as the previous joke. We're recontextualizing those kids as first world kids who, statistically bought toys and they got hurt by those toys. And so that's a situation so that's early in the Onion, The Onion's big enough now where if you did that, you'd probably get a couple of letters.
Yeah.
You'd get letters from parents saying, and I've gotten 1,000 of these letters. They all are written exactly the same, almost as if by some template that someone gave them. They say, "Dear the Onion, first of all, I want to say I have an excellent sense of humor. I've even enjoyed the Onion's humor for many years. But this time, you have gone too far." And so to them, we've crossed a line. So where's the line? I just told you the line is if you're afflicting the afflicted, you've crossed the line. Mm-hmm. If you're comforting the comfortable, you've crossed a line. But everybody has their own personal line. Everybody has their own personal tragedy or their own personal disability. And if you're making fun of their thing, you've crossed the line for them. So you make a calculation at a place like The Onion, and you figure if they're a small enough percentage, I'm going to make fun of them for the benefit of everyone else, and they're going to be fine, because they're not truly an oppressed group. I'm getting real philosophical on all these.
I like it. There's another one here I like, which is, it says heartwarming. When this Subway employee had to walk 20 miles to work because he couldn't afford a car, the CEO of Subway drove alongside him to cheer him on.
Yeah, so I think that one's after my era. And it shows you that shows you the Onion's comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable formula right there. Because we're comforting the poor minimum wage worker of Subway and we're laughing at the CEO. Now, it may seem like we're laughing with the CEO there, but the subtext there is, oh my God, that guy's such a jerk, you know? And we can all relate to the minimum wage employee because we've all been that guy. Yeah, I like that one. And then there's more parody in there too, because we're parodying that new clickbait style of headline writing with the heartwarming colon, you know, the BuzzFeed style.
What's your top 2 or 3?
Oh, there are so many. So one of my favorites is from our first original book, Ardum Century. And it was so we did a look back at the 20th century through fake front pages of the Onion. So we got to cover every major news event of the 20th century and come up with what we thought was the best, funniest headline for every story. And there are so many good ones in there that still make me laugh when I see them. And one of my favorites was for the moon landing, 1969. It was, holy shit, man walks on fucking moon. And the reason I love that so much is because I was 4 when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. And I remember seeing Walter Cronkite doing that on the news. I remember watching on the news. I remember my parents being so wowed by it. All the media was so straight. And what he said on the moon, Neil Armstrong, he's just like so flat. He's like, one small step for a man. It's like, where's the excitement? Where's the passion? This is like a holy shit moment. Yeah. If ever there was a holy shit moment in journalism, this is it. Use the S word.
Right.
So it was like this very cathartic thing to use that headline. And the story ended up being really funny too, because we reproduced the whole conversation of Neil Armstrong and Mission Control, and Neil Armstrong was like, holy fucking shit, are you believing this shit? I can't fucking believe it. Those are the first words on the moon. So that was a lot of fun. And one of my other favorite headlines was in the paper or the website also. And it was an editorial. So we do fake news. We also do these fake editorials. And it was an editorial by the CEO of the Gillette Razor Company. Mm-hmm. And the headline was, fuck it, we're doing 5 blades. So there was a blades war going on, and there were all these like multi-bladed razors and everything. There had never been a 5-bladed razor. And the article is so funny, and I highly recommend anyone who wants a good laugh, just Google that headline and read that article, because he's so cocky, and he's just such a great character. But the reason I like that headline so much, A, it's a funny story, but B, it's one of those times when there's like a holy grail in comedy. When you think you're coming up with a joke that's so hyperbolic, it couldn't possibly ever come true, and then it comes true. A few months after that, Gillette unveiled the 5-bladed razor. First and ever 5-bladed razor. Yeah, so I love when the Onion predicts the future like that. It just feels really satisfying to know that you just nailed it.
There's so much intentionality between within each one of these stories and these headlines that you do.
We overthink them so much. We talk about them and we discuss them, we tear them apart. So there's a lot of intentionality in all those headlines.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about like that process. I mean, because to put the publication out and have the amount of content in each publication and go through this level of detail for each one, just the amount of hours and dedication is mind-blowing.
It's a labor of love. That's the only way it can happen.
All right, I told you we were going to do a quick hit session here towards
the lightning
end.
round.
Lightning round on outrageous marketing. So I'm going to go through the 13. I'm going to throw it out, and you give me your top line. What does it mean?
Got it.
Live your mission.
So I found my mission at age 4. It was comedy, and I've been living it ever since. And I feel like that's kind of the key to a happy life. Like, it didn't matter to me whether I was making money at it. It didn't matter to me who liked what I was doing. I enjoyed doing it, and I was doing it, and I knew I'd find my audience. I knew I'd eventually make money at it at some point. And I feel like that's really the first thing out of the gate you have to do. You have to figure out what your mission is on this planet. And a good way to figure out that mission is, what do you do in your spare time when you're not at work? And I'm not talking about playing video games or watching TV, but what do you do for other people or that makes the world a better place? That's your mission, because you're doing it for fun anyway. If you can figure out a way to make your fun work, I forget who said that. Was that Michael Jordan? You'll never work another day in your life. It's totally true.
Yeah, you just described the Jedburgh podcast.
Excellent. Yeah.
Be obsessed. Jenny's laughing over there because this number 2 resonates.
Be obsessed. Yeah, so you only get one chance at this, at least as far as we know. You get one chance at life. Why are you giving 80%? You know, give it your all, like go all the way with it. Do what you would do if you didn't know you couldn't fail. You know, that's really the only way anyone's ever succeeded at anything. Taking a leap of faith, taking a chance. And we always think that being obsessed is a bad thing. And obviously it is if you're doing something terrible. Right. But if you're doing something good that's making the world a better place, being obsessed is a good thing. And we all love it. Any movie you've ever watched is about a character who is obsessed. That's the only kind of character we care about. And when people are obsessed, they draw other like-minded people to them. It helps you build a team. It helps you build a tribe. It's a really powerful thing to be obsessed. We learn as adults, I think, to be more tempered. You know, as kids, we're all obsessed with something. We give it our all and we go nuts. But then we grow up, we're supposed to be buttoned down. We're supposed to be more calm or whatever. I never grew up. Like I still have that same youthful passion and obsession with comedy that I had at a very early age.
Yeah, I refer to it as the relentless pursuit.
Relentless pursuit, absolutely.
Make people love you.
Make people love you. Easier said than done. But I think in corporate America, there's a big lesson to be learned. I think too many people think of their companies as a business. We're providing a service, we're providing a product. Here's our product. You like it? Give us money. It's a transaction. Wrong. It is a seduction. And you need to get people to like you. You need to get people to love you. So woo them. For God's sake, woo them. Don't just go up to them in the street and say, hey, you got $100? It's not the way to do it. So we all know that analogy. We can follow it through. You have to do nice things for them. You have to do thoughtful things for them. You always have to be there for them. And that means good customer service, amazing product, good follow through, good environment, everything. That's what that means.
Focus on building fans, not profits.
Yeah, that's a big one for me. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, like, for me, it was never about the money. It was about building the fans. It's what I learned from Disney, because that's the real commodity. If you've got the love of a group, that former founder of Google, he was a founder of Google, former higher up in Google, wrote that essay, 1,000 True Fans. And we know now that that's the commodity. That real equity in this life right now is a group of people who love what you do. So if you focus on that and don't care about profits, the profits will follow. You just have to be patient.
Fire on all cylinders and keep looking for new ones.
Yeah, so to me, that in a business terminology, that just means more verticals, different verticals. Like if you've got your, I'm in the comedy world, I'm in entertainment, so it's like I'm doing print, I should be doing radio. I'm doing radio, I should be doing TV. If I'm doing TV, I should be doing a book. I should do a stage play. I should do street art. I should do every known medium, because everybody has a different way that they receive things. And so in this day and age, you can interpret that any way you want, but I think you could interpret it as we need to be advertising in every medium. We need to be present on every social media platform. A big company that can afford that, or anybody that has the time for that, knows that you never know where you're going to find your next customer. So you kind of have to be everywhere. And that really saved the Onion's life more times than one, being in more than one cylinder, not having all our eggs in one basket.
Find the best people.
Again, easier said than done. I know they do big business seminars about how to find A players in your industry. It's like a big thing.
It's my day job.
Yeah, people, it's a whole field of study. How do you do this? And the way I did it at the Onion was I just followed some of the earlier principles that you just mentioned. I was obsessed. I focused on fans, not profits. And I was continually trying to make my product better and better and better. And what that did was it attracted like-minded people who wanted to do the same thing. Any company is going to do that. Name anybody in special effects in movies, they want to work at Lucas. They want to work at ILM because it's the best. Why? Because those people are obsessed. They do it because they love doing it. And where else would you want to work? So the best people are going to find you if you're doing it right.
Free your creatives.
This is a big one because I think a lot of companies think it's important to keep a chair warm from 9 to 5. But anyone who does any kind of creative work does not work well in that environment. They need to have the greatest flexibility possible. So at the Onion, it was always like, our writers were weird and they were misfits. And sometimes somebody would just be depressed and not come in for several days, or they would have to feed their cat medicine and they couldn't handle anything else for like a week while they fed them the medicine. And that was always forgiven. It was like, well, if you can send in your jokes, it's fine, you know?
Yeah.
So for me, it's always about, can you do the work? I don't care where you are. I don't care how you do it, but can you do it? Fine. No other restrictions. So creative people need to be as free as possible.
It's okay to play ping pong at 1 in the afternoon.
Ping pong is absolutely fine. It's okay to work at 4 a.m. if that's when you get your muse. Yeah. Sleep all day. I don't care.
Don't accept conventional wisdom.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about before, about always doing things the way that they've been done or the way you think they should be done. So I know we always have to keep our minds open to new ways of doing things. But for me, the conventional wisdom is immediately suspect. Like, I don't just accept it. I always think, well, if everybody else is doing it, there must be something wrong with it. Mm-hmm. I kind of think back to the Dark Ages. Everybody was a Catholic. Everybody believed that the Catholic religion was true. And if you didn't believe that, then you would get tortured or burned at the stake. So if I were alive then, I would have gotten burned at the stake. I'm alive now. I can look at that and I can say, everybody else believes it. I don't buy it. I'm going to look for a different way. I'm going to figure out a different way to do this.
Serve the brand, not egos.
Yeah, again, like we were talking about with the system for generating ideas, that's a pure meritocracy and not about who do you like the most, because that's our fallback. That's how we're going to do it anyway.
Heighten your brand identity.
That's about finding the most outrageous version of your brand identity and playing that character to the hilt, to the point where people recognize you with delight because they know your character archetype.
Okay, here we go. My favorite. Use quantity to achieve quality.
The best idea never came from a list of one idea. The best idea came from a list of 300 ideas that everybody read through and pored over, looked at the short list, discussed, and finally I don't believe in committee decision making. I think there should always be somebody at the top who's in charge, who has the final say. That person needs to finally say, that's the winner. And then try it. If it doesn't work, scrap it, pick a different one.
I was a young captain. I'd just gotten to Special Forces, and I got dragged into the battalion commander's office one day, and he said, we need you to go to D.C. to go to a conference. And I said, sir, thank you so much for selecting me. It's truly an honor. And he said, Fran, sometimes being the only guy makes you the best guy. And I'll never forget that.
That's funny. That's a good one.
Like I was the only guy who could go. Do things that are press-worthy.
Yeah, so for a long time, we were struggling at the Onion to get noticed. This is before the internet. There was no going viral. It was just like, how do we get more press? How do we get people to write about us? We thought we were doing pretty good work, but we couldn't get any attention. And so we started sending out press releases whenever we'd put out a new issue. And nobody would write about us. Nobody would listen to these press releases. And then we ran an article that got us a big lawsuit threat from the governor of Wisconsin. He was going to sue us. All the newspapers are calling us. We got all this press. And then I realized, oh, that's how it works. You have to do something that is press worthy. Don't just send out press releases. Like, call attention to yourself. Be out, and that's part of being outrageous. Like, what's the most outrageous thing a college humor publication could do, which is what we were at the time? Piss off the governor.
Yeah.
You know, perfect.
Yeah. Okay, last one. Embrace the outrageous.
Yeah. Lean into that character archetype that you are. See how far you can take it. You know, Disney was all about, how can I be the most outrageously family-oriented brand? And for him, that was not just movies, books, etc. The way to lean into that and make it the most outrageous is, how do we create an entire world that people can escape into, that's beyond a movie, beyond a TV show? They literally enter this magical bubble, this kingdom, and everything is family friendly. Who would have thought of that? Nobody would have thought of that unless you were thinking, how can I be the most outrageous version of this character that I'm playing?
Yeah, and if you think about it, what are you doing at Disney World? There are people dressed up as characters running around, and you're loving every second of it, spending so much money to put a smile on your kid's face.
Yep. Brilliant move.
Yeah.
Everyone told him not to do it. Everyone told him it was a mistake. Oh. And he mortgaged his house to pay for Disneyland in Anaheim.
What's next?
Well, what's next for me is more comedy. Obviously, it's all I care about. It's all I'm doing. So I'm working on more comedy books. I started this new comedy podcast called Scott Dikkers Around, where I just try to be funny for 10 minutes.
I listened to it this morning. It was funny.
Thank you. I for a long time was just writing books and stuff, and I was missing the performing aspect of comedy. Because when I was at the Onion, I did a lot of performing. I would always do voices on the videos or the radio show, and I realized I was missing that muscle was atrophying, you know, so I had to get back, because there wasn't a lot of stages to go on during the pandemic either. Yeah. So I've been doing this podcast for a while. That's been really fun. It's been
can I ask you a question about it?
Accountable to come up with new material every week. Yeah, shoot.
Should we send all the former presidents and politicians to jail?
No, only the ones who are. I think so. If a common criminal is suspected of a crime, they're arrested and put on trial for the crime, right? But the elites and the politicians just get away with it. You know, we don't put them in jail like a common criminal. We don't go to their house and bust them at 3 a.m. So everybody's upset that Donald Trump got raided. I think the left was upset when Hillary Clinton got raided. I think it's delightful that they're getting raided. It's like, that's how we should always treat the politicians. They get way too much special treatment. So yeah, treat them like common criminals. I would have loved to have seen Donald Trump thrown to the ground and cuffed like a common criminal. And imagine how satisfying that would be to the American people, to see an elite treated like all of us. Now that's punching up. That's literally, let's bring them down to our size. We know they always get away with it anyway, you know, even if it's just for show. Let's see it. Yeah.
Scott, as we close out, the Jedburghs had to do 3 things every day, call them foundations, habits. They had to be able to shoot, they had to be able to move, they had to be able to communicate. If they did these 3 things with the utmost precision, then they could actually focus their attention on more complex challenges that came their way. What are the 3 things that you do every day to be successful in your world?
That is an excellent question. I'm tempted to answer like basic health things that I do, because like everybody will tell you things like gratitude exercise and meditation and stuff like that. And I don't know if that's what you're looking for, if you're looking for more like task-oriented things.
Whatever comes to your mind.
Yeah. So there's definitely those things, but I'll focus on like the comedy-related things, the task-oriented things. So for me, they are, I have to write every day. That's number 1. I have to write comedy every day. Because if you're not writing comedy, like what kind of comedian, what kind of comedy writer are you? You have to do it every day. Number 2 is I have to help someone else be better at comedy every day. So when I was at the Onion, I would always hire people who were completely green, no comedy experience. And one of the best parts of my job was mentoring them and teaching them how to do comedy on a fundamental level. And since I left the Onion, I've been teaching comedy online and at the Second City, and it's incredibly rewarding. I love comedy. I want there to be more in the world, so I want to give as much as I can to people who want to learn about comedy to do better. So number 3 is I need to enjoy some comedy. I need to laugh at something. I need to find something funny. And I need to be playing the game as an audience member and not just as a creator. Because I've gone many, many months where I didn't enjoy any comedy. I just produced it. And if you ever want to completely empty yourself, try that, because it's soul crushing. When you see any type of comedy and you don't even see the comedy anymore, you just see the code of the matrix, because you're just so in the business. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh yeah, that's a misplaced focus joke with a meta humor twist at the end. You know, you need to be able to sit back and get a good hearty laugh. So those would be my 3 things.
Can you separate yourself from looking at it that?
Well, no, you can't. But I've learned to, at least like a wine taster can enjoy wine, or a film critic can enjoy a film, maybe on a deeper level, but they're still enjoying it, so that I can still look at it critically and appreciate it while also enjoying it. So I used to be really intellectual about it, and it was really hard for me to enjoy it. So that's been a life improvement in recent decades.
I'm sure stress level goes down.
Totally, yeah.
Write every day, help someone else be funny, and enjoy some comedy yourself.
Yeah.
Those are the three.
Those would be my
great.
3 things.
We spoke about a lot of different topics here that you covered in outrageous marketing in your life, building the Onion. We tied a lot of that into these characteristics of performance. We talked about the 5 soft truths. At the end of these conversations, I talked about all 9 throughout this thing. I picked one of these 9 characteristics: drive, resiliency, adaptability, humility, integrity, curiosity, team ability, effective intelligence, and emotional strength. And I think about our conversation. I think about what I've learned about you, what we talked about here today. Elite performers demonstrate all these 9. Never at one time, depending on the situation you're in. There'll be a combination of a couple of them. When I think about one that I would sum you up, I believe it really comes down to curiosity. Because I think that with curiosity comes drive, comes resiliency, adaptability. You have to have humility when you're curious, because you're not always going to get it right. You have to have integrity because you got to do the right thing. You got to be able. You'll display team ability. You'll use effective intelligence and think about your experience of the past, and emotional strength. All of these things come into your ability to wake up every day and ask yourself the question that you posed earlier, which is, am I doing it the best that it can be done?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's interesting. Thank you. I feel like writing comedy has to be approached fundamentally from a mindset of curiosity. What's funny about this? Oh, that's kind of amusing. Why is that? And then just trying to write out joke beats or get at the core of what makes that funny. Because comedy is one of those things that you can't just repeat the same formula. Every joke has to be completely from scratch. In any other genre, if you want to make somebody cry, there's a few things you can do. You kill a horse, in a movie, and everybody will cry. In a scary movie, you just show a creepy clown with a knife, and you're done. And they can bring all those things back. But in comedy, if you bring a banana peel or a rubber chicken, everybody's gonna be like, "Saw that before. Mm-hmm. What do you got this new?" So yeah, curiosity is really more fundamental than I would have thought before this conversation. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
You've demonstrated it. You've demonstrated in your whole career. And today, coming here, meeting with you, coming to Minneapolis for the first time is truly an honor. I've learned a tremendous amount about journalism, about the industry, now about building brands. Reading the book, speaking with you, so much of it resonates. All 13 of your points, I feel like I'm living every day as we build this podcast, living my dream.
That's great.
And I remember the days when I was walking around Boston University holding the Onion in my hand, and truly an inspirational organization that you built, a career that you built, and thank you for sharing it with me.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for coming all this way to talk to me, and I'm so glad you enjoyed your visit in our fair city.
Now we have to walk through the sky bridge, so
we got to go
get
check
cold.
out the sky bridge. I don't think I've walked across it yet. I'm sure it's thrilling.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
American Jedburghs went out to form the foundation of the United States Special Forces and the Special Activities Director to the Central Intelligence Agency. Thanks for listening to the Jedburgh Podcast. I'm your creator and host, Fran Racioppi. Join us next week for a new episode on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Check us out on YouTube for full episodes, highlights, and other behind-the-scenes content. If you like what you heard, give us a like and leave a review. Follow me, Fran Racioppi, Talent War Group, and our sponsor Jersey Mike Subs on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter. Send your comments and inquiries to media@talentwargroup.com. As former members of Special Operations Forces, the Jedburgh Podcast and Talent War Group contribute a percentage of all profits to the Special Operations Warrior Foundation, supporting the families of our fallen warriors. Thanks for joining us on this episode. How you prepare today determines success tomorrow.